In today's lesson, we're going to talk about cultural self-awareness. Because I'm U.S. American and I work primarily with U.S. American students, today we're going to talk about U.S. American culture. Often, people don't realize that they have a culture, or in fact, many cultures. They believe that the way that they think and act is universal. So one of the steps in gaining cultural intelligence and intercultural competence is recognizing that you yourself have a culture and having a better understanding of how that culture influences the way you think and act. When I say that you have a culture, what I mean is you are influenced by your social group, the members of your society. You think and act in ways that support and reinforce the ideas and values of this group. You subscribe to a way of life that's been taught to you, just as other people have a way of life that's been taught to them. For this lesson, I'm going to focus mostly on national cultural identity. But of course, we are all a combination of the many cultures, the many identities that we embrace, including our gender identity, socioeconomic identity, regional identity, racial identity, professional identity, and more. One of the first things that people notice when they cross cultures, other than just the differences themselves, is the experience of being the other, perhaps for the first time in their lives. The experience of being stereotyped and judged often feels unfair, or at least somewhat negative. So I hope that at a minimum, this experience helps you develop empathy and move away from stereotyping others. But of course, there is some truth in stereotypes. There is something that we share in common as a culture. So what is it that we share culture-wise as Americans? I've picked the 4th of July as the day to do this lesson on cultural self-awareness because celebrations are a great way to gain insight into a culture. As I've said previously, we can learn about deep cultural values and perspectives by examining visible cultural manifestations. Cultural manifestations can come in a number of ways. For example, in the daily habits and activities, in the structure and layout of spaces, in the ways and approaches to interactions, in leisure time activities, and in the rites, rituals, and celebrations of a group of people. So let's look at some of these and learn more about ourselves. So first, in the daily habits and activities. In the US, we spend our time going places, getting places quickly, working, shopping, filling as much as possible into our days. At the end of the day, we may ask each other, "What did you do today?" All of these point to a value of productivity. Next, in the structure and layout of spaces. In the US, we tend to expand horizontally. We use space for ourselves individually. And we even have folkloric songs about wide ranges where the deer and the antelope play, beautiful spacious skies, and bountiful lands that stretch from sea to shining sea. We can of course dissect this with a more critical lens, thinking about the damage that this manifest destiny imposed upon our land and the people who were here first. But on the surface level, it's important to realize that we adore and celebrate space in the US. In the ways and structures of interactions. In the US, we tend to use smiles to convey friendliness, and friendliness is our preferred mode of interaction. This comes from a history of immigrants who needed to use facial expressions to show that they were non-threatening when they didn't have a language in common. But it also showcases values of equality and optimism, which are key American traits. In the rites, rituals, and celebrations. Many people tend to think that Americans don't have rites and rituals in the same way that they may see, for example, the Japanese or the Maori do. But nonetheless, we do have important cultural rites and rituals. For example, if I play this song, you will immediately know the occasion. You can imagine the setting, the dress, and the significance of the ceremony. And of course, today, the 4th of July, can give you all sorts of insights about our cultural values and influences. For example, the meaning of the day, celebrating our independence from England. This was, undoubtedly, revolutionary, pun intended. This break from a colonial power, this creation of a democracy, not only changed the course of history, it developed a set of values and a mindset that are still present today, including ideals of independence, initiative, entrepreneurship, and even a bit of rebellion and a certain disregard for authority and old ways of doing things. The celebration of the day, picnics, parades, fireworks, they all speak to the ways that we like to socialize. We like big, visible displays, short spans of socializing, celebrations of military and service people, and by extension, honoring the bravery of everyday people. Here's some other American traits. I'll give you some examples of how we show these, but you can think of your own as well. First, we're informal, certainly in the way we like to socialize. Picnics and potlucks where everyone brings something and shares, in the way that we address one another, with first names, and the ways that we dress, much more casually than other cultures. We don't like hierarchy, a legacy of our rebellion against colonial power. We approach life as if we're all equal. In other words, you're not better than me. Now, interestingly, this isn't necessarily the same thought or value as saying, I'm not better than you, which is a more communal approach to egalitarianism. And that leads us to our next American trait, individuality. We like to think of ourselves as unique individuals, which is one reason why I think Americans don't always recognize that they have a shared culture. Individuality very much defines the way that we want to be seen and how we approach life, that we need to get ahead as individuals, that our individual success defines us, and that our individual identity should be valued. Next, directness. We're fairly direct in our interactions. We don't, quote unquote, beat around the bush, and we believe that honesty is the best policy. We're practical in that we prefer reason, not emotion, to drive our decisions. And we tend to dismiss things that seem overly ceremonious as too fluffy. Tied to this is our preference for efficiency and, again, productivity, which has led to a culture of drive-thrus, multitasking, and innovations to save time. We like to acquire things, or said more negatively, we're materialistic. There are many in the world who view Americans as overly focused on making money and using wealth as a marker of success. And while this might not be true for everyone, as Americans, we do tend to focus on acquiring things, shopping, buying things, seen in the fact that we use these important national holidays often as opportunities for sales. And generally speaking, we're a friendly people. We tend to smile at one another, even strangers, in elevators or standing in line at grocery stores, as well as in the way we interact with supervisors and even figures of authority like police officers. Although we do tend to be uncomfortable when friendliness moves beyond just superficial questions. As I've covered these traits, you may have found it difficult to imagine any other way of thinking, any other value system. And this is in fact what a culture does. It trains you, it conditions you to a way of thinking, such to the point that you think it's normal, typical, universal. So the value of crossing cultures is, at minimum, exposing you to other ways of thinking, other ways of valuing, other ways of living life, and recognizing that your own value system is not preferred by everyone. Another important aspect of talking about these traits is acknowledging that these are values that we may aspire to, but not always embody. For example, in some cases, these values might conflict with one another, say friendliness and honesty. We've learned, for example, not necessarily to comment on other people's appearance, even if we say something nice, but certainly not to say something that would be deemed negative. When these values conflict, this is often where we go into conversations, what some might even call gossip, where we discuss and determine what collectively with others we think was the quote-unquote right thing to say or do. So again, how a culture works is you're enculturated in, socialized into a way of thinking, a way of behaving, such to the point that becomes unconscious, becomes thought of as universal. You don't really think about the visible manifestations, let alone the underlying values and meanings. It's only in crossing cultures that you may begin to recognize that there are differences. So in gaining intercultural competence, the first thing we want to do is at minimum not judge those differences, not assume that our way of being, our value system, our behaviors are better. Rather, you want to be open to learning about their value system, their set of behaviors, their rationale for their way of interacting and behaving and living life. So all of these things that I've mentioned, holidays, celebrations, folklore, can give you insights into another culture, into their shared history and value system. Through doing so, you can learn not only about them, but more about yourself. In fact, many travelers say that one of the most important things they gained from the process of crossing cultures was learning more about themselves, digging deeper into why they behave the way they do, and what might be the benefit of seeing other ways of doing things, of changing the way that they behave even. In doing so, you can gain an appreciation for the ways that you've been socialized, recognize that it's been taught and reinforced to you. You can accept it and value it and continue to want that as your value system, but at the same time, recognize and appreciate a different way of doing things, a different value system, and know that it is equally valid and right. I hope you've enjoyed this opportunity to learn more about yourself as a cultural being and to learn more about U.S. American cultural values. I hope you'll use this knowledge to continue to learn more about the nature of culture in general, about the cultures that you visit, and about yourself and your own culture as you gain cultural self-awareness.